Welcome to Unique People Stories. Teachers. What are some signs that a student is being abused or lives in a toxic environment? I developed a tic. For years. I would rip out all my eyebrows and eyelashes. Half the time I didn't realize that I was doing it. Because I lived with my abuser and was so stressed out and terrified all the time. When I was 17, I finally moved in with a friend to get away from them. And people started telling me they knew all along that something was wrong. But no one ever said anything. No one ever took action. Even when I tried to come forward on multiple occasions. I'm begging you guys, if you see something, say something. I was a normal, happy kid until a new kid in 6th grade randomly picked me to bully. I had been taught to ignore it and it would stop, but that didn't work. My parents were going through a divorce at the time, so I didn't tell my mom or anyone else. I was too embarrassed and thought I was old enough to handle it myself. Well, as a result, I completely stopped speaking. I guess now it would be called selective mutism. It lasted throughout college. It crippled every aspect of my life. I found out years later from my older sister after my mom had passed away that my mom had asked her, "Have you noticed that Sanibel has stopped talking?" My sister told her yes, but my mom didn't do anything about it to help, so I literally suffered in silence for years until I was able to get therapy on my own. So anyway, I agree and beg you as well, if you see something, say something. My sister and I had perfect or near perfect attendance for years growing up, and the philosophy for sickness was that you can't be sick if you didn't throw up. I did throw up once and my mom said, "Now don't you feel better?" Off to school I went. If a student doesn't care about content and doesn't seem happy about getting a good grade, just relieved. I've seen students almost break down when earning a poor grade on an assessment knowing the pending verbal, psychological abuse coming. One student, living with his father and 6 hours from his mother, was swore at and told he wouldn't see his mother for Christmas because he had a C. The kid cried in my classroom after school and poured his heart out about not having seen his mom for 3 months. Berating a child and withholding seeing his other parent for a grade? High expectations are great. High expectations without support, however, in this case, emotional, put undue stress on students, resulting in a cycle of anxiety that can permeate their lives. This was my main form of abuse growing up. Anything less than an A was unacceptable. Sometimes if I got an A, but not an A+, I would still get in trouble. My mom loved comparing me to other kids and cursing at me before she began her silent treatment. "Why can't you be more like X? I bet X got a better grade." Then she wouldn't speak to me for days at a time. I was an only child to a single parent. My mom was also very strict, so no TV during that time. Just silence for days. Nobody to speak to. Nobody to cry to. Nobody to fix food for me or to say good morning or good night. Just me and my thoughts constantly repeating my mother's dissatisfaction. Years later, I can finally be in a room or my car by myself without randomly breaking into tears. But that took time. When I talk to my mom, she always talks about how proud she is of me. But I hate to hear it because I remember the path that brought me here. I'd rather be happy and stupid than depressed and smart. It's pretty obvious. But I had a kid come in with a black eye. I didn't think anything of it at first. He was a very active child with a lot of energy. So I nonchalantly asked what happened. He instantly responded with, "I ran into a door." And the way he said it was so quick and forced that it sounded rehearsed. Any teacher is required to report suspicion of abuse, even if it may be nothing. Turns out, his moms were the worst kind of evil. Regularly beat him. Made him sit in a closet for hours if he acted out. Forced him to stand for hours holding water buckets, and if he stumbled they'd hit him more. Believe it or not, his baby sister, about 3, had it worse. Found out she was being sexually molested by the stepmom while her biological mother watched. Now that I'm looking back on it, I can realize something was wrong because she was so developmentally delayed when it came to speech. Thankfully, the pieces of shit that called themselves parents were arrested. And both children went on to live with their grandmother. But it's disgusting what happened to them. Anyway, short answer to the question, unexplained bruises. Rehearsed lines trying to explain them away. Sometimes developmental delays in speech. Drawings not always. But sometimes kids express what they can't say through drawing. Let me clear up some things. The biological father left the children. And the biological mother later married a woman. This is one instance of abuse originating from a same-sex couple. But that in no way indicates that same-sex couples are inherently bad parents. Nor does it mean they should not have children. I'm not longer their teacher and haven't seen them in about 4 years, but last I heard they were doing well. Grandmother isn't perfect. But they're safe and cared for. My partner's mom is a teaching assistant in a classroom. She said one of the most worrying things she hears is, "Can I tell you a secret?" A lot of the time it's very innocent, but it always sets off alarm bells first. We have told our children since a very young age. We don't have secrets. We have surprises. A birthday or holiday gift is something we don't tell the person for a short time, and it's something fun for us and them. A secret is something that someone would want you to never tell, and a good grown-up will never tell a kid to keep a secret from another grown-up. If grown-ups have a problem or something they need help with, they will tell a grown-up, not a child. So the first thing you are to do is tell mama and daddy as soon as you see us. If another child tells you a secret, you are to also tell us immediately, because the child might need a grown-up's help. My mother-in-law frequently gets tattled on after telling the kids to keep the extra cookie or candy a secret. Not exactly a teacher, but a former daycare and after-school care worker here. I had a child for years who came in clothes that were old and too small. Her shoes would be falling apart and she'd often ask us for tape to put them back together. I was always suspicious of this, but the other staff would just say, "Oh, they don't have money," so I tried to let it slide, even though I knew it wasn't really true and that clothes for a 12-year-old are not that expensive. Especially when we had lots of discount shops around. She would also come in smelling badly or her hair being greasy. After subtly talking about it, and her telling me she just didn't like to shower, I found she wasn't allowed to shower often. As a child going through puberty, this was unacceptable to me. But again, the other staff brushed off my concerns. One day she started talking about the bugs in her room, and I felt my intuition growing stronger about the situation. This was a clear case of neglect. There were little things here and there that made me suspicious as well. Like stories of her grandfather stealing money from her and other little signs of it. After being concerned for a long time, the thing that broke it all for me was hearing how she was given old, moldy food for lunch. I called DCF that night. A week later she started coming in smelling fresh and wearing new, clean clothes and new shoes. I can't say what else changed at home, but seeing her confidence rise when she was finally clean was worth it to me. To the people upset I didn't call sooner, I hear you and I understand. I am mad at myself that I hadn't called sooner. I was too easily influenced by bosses and coworkers and believed them when they fed me reasons not to call. Believe me, it bothers me too. I worked with kids in a restorative justice program, basically community service, and there would be kids who would have so many hours they would come in after school and weekends for months. We had some kids who would do something petty and stupid literally weeks before they were done. Despite being fairly successful in the program, it was because coming in every day and having staff ask about their life, make sure they had lunch every day and give some structure to their life was something they craved and didn't have at home. They would self-sabotage in order to keep it. It was so sad. Imagine how bad your home life has to be to choose do court-ordered manual labor rather than be at home. Band teacher here. A lot of times when teaching kids in beginning band how to play their instruments early on, you have to touch various body parts. Hands, of course. Arms. Hips and shoulders for getting them into proper posture alignment. I always ask before I touch anywhere, is it okay if I touch your ex? Almost all kids say yes. I've had 2 that have said no. One was a student with autism and did not want to be touched. And the other, turns out, was being abused at home. It's not a guarantee, of course, but often a sign. Kudos for giving them body autonomy by asking first. This jolted an unexpected memory from high school. We had a gym teacher who would always help the kids jump when we did gymnastics exercises, and somehow he always seemed to misgrab when a girl was jumping. butt, groin. You name it. With boys his hand placement was immaculate. But with the girls he always grabbed parts by accident. All the girls were talking about it, saying what a pervert he was. I don't think anyone ever reported him though. I did gymnastics when I was younger. And I had one of those coaches. I wouldn't say she was a pervert as such. But she would always slap our butts and run her hands all along our bodies while spotting us. I'm aware it's for safety precautions. But a couple of us started to feel really uncomfortable by it. I finally hit my breaking point when we were planking. IDRM what exercise exactly, but we had our backs and butts faced upwards and she came along and slapped my butt and told me off for bad posture, which really caught me off guard. I ended up yelling at her. And from that lesson onwards she refused to even acknowledge my existence, lol. In all honesty, it was worth it BC she didn't bother me ever again. I ended up quitting a couple months later after my parents realized I was miserable with her as my coach. I didn't tell them about her, so I quit. Turns out she got fired a week after I quit for an unrelated reason. Not sure if I should be upset because she was the coach of our whole country's gym team. But I'm just glad she stopped bothering me after that whole incident. I should add that in my 9 years of doing gymnastics as a kid, I have never had a teacher that slapped our asses and yelled at us so vigorously for messing up. She was racist at times too. But I won't go into that. It's been a few years. But I had an situation that stuck with me. My students were working on something. Probably solving density equations. And one guy came up to ask for help. I was standing near my whiteboard but had left my favorite expo marker on the cart that held my projector laptop. So I reached around him to grab the marker and show him on the board how to figure out the problem. Hey, if one kid is struggling with a problem, there's usually several more that haven't asked. Anyway, when I reached, he flinched hard, arms over his head, eyes tight shut, as if he just knew I was going to hurt him. I kept him after class and we talked. Lots of tears, not just his. He showed me bruises on his back. I notified my principal that I'd need someone to cover my next class. And called DCS, what most states call CPS. He was placed in a foster home and his father was arrested. He missed a few days and came back. He wasn't instantly better, which would make for a better story. But by the end of the school year, I could see he was a little more confident. A little happier. This was around 10 years ago. I often wonder what happened to him. Regression. I'm a speech therapist who works in an inner-city elementary children where we see a lot of poverty, drug abuse, etc. I had one case stand out to me in particular that stands out. I saw a little girl, 7 years old, who had been delayed on her language skills. We knew she had a very difficult upbringing since she was the product of a rape. She lived only with her mother, who impressively kept the two events, the rape and the birth of her daughter, as separated as possible. The rapist, who I refused to call a father, had served time in jail but was released at this point on house arrest. He had no rights to see her. But the rapist's parents, technically the child's grandparents, went to court and demanded rights to see their granddaughter. They refused to ever believe their son was a rapist. Some judge, who I hope thinks of this case often, allowed it as long as father was not present. It started as supervised visits and eventually turned into visitation without supervision. Mom fought as hard as she could. But she couldn't afford a lawyer like the grandparents could. Mom had to drop her daughter off to the parents of her rapist every other weekend for one night. I don't know how she did it. Anyways, I started to see a huge regression in her language skills. Her mean length of utterance decreased. She couldn't logically organize her thoughts into sentences. She couldn't categorize anymore, and so forth. Academically, when I spoke to the teacher, she said the same thing. But it really came to a head when she started to regress in other non-school related skills. One day she wet her pants in my classroom. And she just lost it. She was crying. She destroyed my room. She was hitting and punching to the point where I had to restrain her from hurting herself. She just lost it. Finally, when she calmed down, I brought her down to the nurse. Got her a change of pants. But this was a girl was not only potty trained since I'd known her. But she was known for being sweet, polite, and just slow to warm up. She was not a child to have outbursts like this. She wasn't sick. And I felt like I really needed to say something outside the school. Long story short, grandparents were sneaking over to father's house so that her father could see and help raise his daughter. Turns out he started inappropriately touching her in the bathroom, during tub time, at the kitchen table, watching TV. Basically any chance he could when the grandparents walked out the room for any amount of time. My heart broke for the mom. I'll never forget her telling us about how she couldn't live with herself knowing the fact that the man who raped her also touched her daughter. Anyways, you can probably imagine all the hurt and heartbreak the mother felt. This is how my daughter was before we found out she was being sexually abused. She started talking at 10 months old. Potty trained herself just after her 2nd birthday so she didn't have to wear diapers of any kind. That was all pretty amazing, but there were signs that I blame myself every day for not noticing. She had a stutter that would get worse when she was upset. She would pee her pants, but only when she was with me. She would beg me to stay home from work and needed to sleep touching me at night. Shortly before her 4th birthday, we found out my father, her babysitter, had a secret game he would play with her when no one else was around. It started during diaper changes, which is why she potty trained so fast. When she mentioned it for the first time, I talked to my fiancé and we agreed I needed to quit my job so she no longer needed daycare and he was never alone with my father ever again. But she wouldn't tell us anything about the game for 6 months, and as soon as we had the details, I had him arrested. He made a deal with the DA for 12 years in jail. But the judge only sentenced him to probation. She was terrified to leave the house in case he saw her. He told her that she would be in big trouble if she ever told. My nieces then stepped forward once he was out of the house and told their stories, and he was arrested again. The same judge insisted on taking the case again and only gave him 60 months jail time. He was released in March 2019, and in October 2019 I got to watch him die a painful death from esophageal cancer. Now he will never hurt anyone again. Bastard. Would you do your best to help children that are in such situations?